Testing, testing. One moment, I think we have it. Okay, we're live.
Okay, this is a call to order of the City of Cape May Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting on Thursday, March 24th. It is now 6:05 p.m. In compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided. If any member has reason to believe this meeting is being held in violation of this act, they should so state at this time. Hearing none, we'll have a Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay,
Okay,
Mrs.
now we'll have the roll call.
Yes, Mrs. Hutchinson, Mr. Murray,
Here.
Mrs. Werner,
Here.
Ms. Hessel,
Here.
Mr. Ledwin,
Here.
Mrs. Notch,
Here.
Mr. Walsh,
Here.
Mrs. McDade, Mr. Venuto.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We'll start off with the resolutions. We have three tonight. The first is Resolution 0324-2022, Gerald and Mary Ann Jones. Do I have a motion to adopt that resolution?
So move. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Ledwin, seconded by Mr. Walsh. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Werner,
Abstain.
Ms. Hessel,
Yes.
Mr. Ledwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Notch,
Yes.
Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
Mr. Venuto,
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next is Resolution 0324-2022. That's Connor and Alex McMahon. Do I hear a motion to adopt that resolution?
I'll make that motion. Second.
Motion by Mrs. Werner, seconded by Ms. Hessel. Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
Mrs. Notch,
Yes.
Mr. Ledwin,
Yes.
Ms. Hessel,
Yes.
Mrs. Werner,
Abstain.
Mr. Venuto,
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Thank you.
Finally, Resolution 303-24-2022, Renee Quinn at 28 Jackson Street. I have a motion to adopt that resolution.
Motion.
That was a motion by Mrs. Notch,
Second.
second by Mrs. Werner. Mrs. Werner,
Abstain.
Ms. Hessel,
Yes.
Mr. Ledwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Notch,
Yes.
Mr. Walsh,
Yes.
Mr. Venuto,
Yes.
Mr. Murray.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, now in accordance with the agenda we had, there are three applications that are going to be adjourned to meetings in the future. You want me to announce them, or it's been on the agenda listed here? I don't have to announce it. Okay. It's Resolution John and Rebecca Adams. This application will be adjourned to the May 26, 2022 meeting. The second is Cape May Seagrass Properties. Again, this application will be adjourned to the April 28th, 2022 meeting. And AT&T, this application has been withdrawn by the applicant. Okay, which gets now to our one and only application on the agenda tonight. That's Washington and Madison LLC.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Anthony Monzo from Monzo Catanese Hillegas, representing the applicant Washington and Madison LLC. With me are Peter Tiberzio to my left, who is the owner of the applicant, and to my right is John Cornick, who's our engineer for the project. If you would like to have them sworn in, we can do so. And
I'll also swear in our board engineer, do each of you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do?
I do.
I do have two exhibits that I'd like to add, and I could just one round. These are just photos of property at street level, and marked as A1 and A2, and two different photos. One is a photo directly looking at the project site, and the other is a photo looking directly at Convention Hall from Beach Avenue.
Okay, thank you.
Exhibit A1 is photo direct site, and 2 is convention hall. Got it.
So this application is for a use variance for the property, which consists of 5 condominium units, two of which were consolidated into one unit. So there's 4 units in total at the property located at 722 Beach Avenue, which is just to the east of Convention Hall. And these units formerly were occupied by the Morrow's Nut House retail store, candy store, along with some other retail uses. Now it is owned by Washington and Madison LLC. And we were before the planning board last year to get relief from the requirements that substantial renovations or improvements to a building in a flood zone would need to be brought to flood standards, which would have entailed raising part of a building that's attached to another condominium unit, and based on the proofs and the testimony that were submitted before the planning board, relief was granted in order to allow renovations, both interior and exterior. There are no enlargements or additions proposed for this building. Mainly, it's a new facade, new windows, new doors, new signs, and interior fit-out. And the fit-out is something that was kind of up in the air then, because the applicant wasn't quite sure who the tenants would be, so there was no real detail at the time as to exactly what these stores would look like. Since then, 3 of the stores, actually all 4 now, are slated to be rented. 2 of them are going to continue strictly as retail, and that's going to be a retail shop along with an ice cream shop that's going to sell ice cream for takeout only. And there's a coffee shop that initially was going to be just takeout, no cooking facilities. But with this application, the applicant is looking to put 24 seats for people to sit down to have their coffee and pastries. So that really brings it into more of a restaurant classification, along with one of the units that will be a dining-type restaurant that would have also 24 seats. So the building was always used as retail. So with the retail to retail, it would have just been exterior and interior renovations that would not have needed approval because of the 2 restaurant uses that are not permitted. In fact, the only thing permitted in this beach strand is amusements. So retail and restaurants are not permitted
I'm
uses.
sorry, you said the only thing permitted is,
Amusements. Most of the uses on the promenade are not amusements. In fact, the only 2 amusements are owned and operated by Mr. Tiberzio, and that's the arcade across McCarney's and also the arcade to the east of Convention Hall. So what this application for is merely, it's a site plan waiver because there are no real improvements to the site itself other than the facade renovations and signage, and also the use variance to permit 2 non-conforming uses change in use from retail to restaurant. And because there's no parking, obviously, and there's a parking requirement, we would need a variance for a lack of parking. But the testimony that Mr. Cornick will provide, and I'm sure the board is aware that there just is no parking along the promenade, but there's plenty of parking on Beach Avenue for the commercial uses that are in that zone. So with that background, I'd like to first have Mr. Tiberzio provide some history of the site, what his plans are, and, you know, why he's proposing the uses that we're seeking approval for. So, Mr. Tiberzio, can you just give some background as to your involvement with the city, your businesses along the promenade, and just an overview of what you're intending to do?
So, good evening to everyone here. My family has operated these arcades and a couple little food restaurants for about 48 years, since 1974. And the business is good, you know, right now, business is fine at the present time, but the boardwalk in general is not as popular as it used to be years ago. And in my opinion, I think it's probably because of the mall, Victorian Mall. That's like a great attraction. So consequently, things have been on a downward swing, and there's quite a few buildings there that are kind of deteriorating and just in ill repair. So we need zoning relief first, as Mr. Monzo said, that, you know, the zoning is so restrictive, you can't do anything except an arcade.
So based on your experience with the two arcades that you own and operate, do you see any need for additional arcade buildings?
I do not. In fact, we were here 2 years ago, and the one arcade, we reduced it to 50%. And we got approval from the board to put a nice restaurant in, and that's working out well. So, yeah, there's no real need for more amusements. We need to have a variety of shops and small cafes, make it more inviting and attractive. You know, the boardwalks, it's an important and essential part of the culture of Cape May. It's small, but it's you know, it is what it is, and we need to fix it up.
Referring to the exhibit that's on the E-zone, I believe this is in the packet as well, and it is, I think there's an attachment to the application that has this rendering of the property, but you can just look at what is on the E-zone. Mr. Tiberzio, if you can just explain what you're doing here, the materials they're using, and
So first of all, we're not expanding anything. We just added a little facade above the metalwork, which is the existing overhang that we're just covering with metal, and changed the glass work, and we're going to use a white siding, not specific, doesn't have any specific detail to that, but it's going to be like a white siding, all white, and there's 3 stores in the front. The corner store is the ice cream. The clothing store is going to be a clothing store. And the far right store is an Asian restaurant that would like to have some seating. So they're not, you know, until we get the approval, we can't do them. And in the back, it says Sunrise, but that's actually a coffee shop. And they're also seeking to have some additional seating, some seating at all, in fact.
I skipped over in my introduction the signage, and I know we had asked for sign variances because we have 4 signs, but really there's 1 sign for each unit, and each sign meets the sign ordinance requirements, 20 square feet. But there are 4 signs for 4 different businesses. The total is 80 square feet. So whether we need a variance or do not need a variance, we can provide some proofs for that. I know Mr. Hurlis picked up on that in his review memo as well. But we had actually asked the zoning officer as to whether we needed variance relief for 4 signs. He said as long as each sign is no larger than the 20 square feet that's required by ordinance and it meets all of the other requirements, a variance would not be needed for that. and that was after the application was submitted. So we can address that. I don't know if Mr. King wants to opine on that, and, you know, we can put the proofs on for the variance and ask for it, but it's, you know,
Unless the variance is taking some trouble, you might as
go,
well.
I agree with that.
If it starts to teeter, we'll deal with it.
The strict reading of it says, one or more signs may be attached to or mounted on a building face, subject to all of the following conditions. 1, the total area of such sign or signs does not exceed 20 square feet. You're exceeding 20 square feet, so you need a variance, in my opinion.
Sounds right.
Okay. I think we're through with Mr. Tiberzio's testimony. We can move to Mr. Cornick now.
Thank you.
Did you want to present his credentials, and we'll accept him as an expert?
Testified, I believe, before the board, but you want his credentials on the record, we could do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
We just tell us
Okay.
the license and
yeah, if you could.
Absolutely. So my name is John Kornick, Kornick. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a licensed professional planner with licenses in good standing in the state of New Jersey. I'm also licensed in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. I have presented before this zoning board in the past. I've presented before many zoning boards, planning boards, and county boards throughout the state of New Jersey. And this is my hometown too, so I've been here before.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cornick. Yeah,
Okay.
we accept him as an expert.
Thank you.
So, just give some background and as to your knowledge of this application and what your position is on it.
Sure. So our office was commissioned to take a look at this project, survey the project, and then also provide a site plan as part of the application. I do have a smaller version of what I'm going to put up on the easel, if we can hand that out. This is a colored rendering, if we want to add it as an exhibit.
We can mark that as A3.
So this particular plan is exactly what's shown on your application. But it's modified with an aerial image and some coloring to identify what Mr. Tiberzio is going to be doing on the property. And as Mr. Monzo indicated, this application's address is 722 Beach Avenue. It's block 1000, lots 36 and 36.01. The site maintains approximately 10,096 square feet. Has a dimensional aspect of it, a frontage of 50 feet on the promenade with a depth of 201 feet. Now, this was the former Morrow's Nut House. Attached to the rear is one of the condominiums is McGlade's on the Beach restaurant, and that's been a long-standing restaurant in that area for over 25 years. The zoning for the site is the S1 Beach Strand zone, and to the north, if you look at this page, north is to the top. On the opposite side of Beach Avenue, that is your C3 zoning district and historic preservation zone. So this particular property is not located with any of the historic preservation aspects of zoning within the city. Again, the site has been historically maintained as a single-story retail use with the restaurant use to the rear. In the past, prior to the 1994 era, there was an ice cream shop there. That was Gene's Ice Cream, and then McGlade's was adjacent to that. My knowledge was that over time, the McGlade's family purchased Gene's, and when the Morrows owned it, that's when it was created into a condominium. They've owned the rear portion of the property. That is not part of the application, nor are they representing or changing any of the use back there. So we are here before the board for a use variance for what Mr. Monzo has indicated. The site is fronted by Beach Avenue. We did receive variance relief from your flood prevention zone with respect to the renovation, and we are here for retail and restaurant use. So that does require a D2 variance, I believe that we have qualified it as. So we do have an existing restaurant on the site, so that's an existing non-conforming condition, and we're merely expanding that with the renovations that Mr. Tiberzio is looking to do. I did have some opportunity to review the reexamination, the master plan reexamination report. That was a document dated March 12th, 2019. And unfortunately, the S1 zone was really not discussed. So there was really no direction under that reexamination report to identify what the uses are on the promenade. And as Mr. Tiberzio indicated, predominantly it is retail and restaurant use. What's that?
That's not, you're not right.
I'm not right?
No.
But hang on.
Okay.
It's all good news.
Yeah.
Just let us see what's-
But what they did discuss was the annex of the convention hall, which is where Mermaids is and all that. So
Right.
they did discuss what that use and uses are and future rehabilitation and renovation and maintaining that. So they did discuss in that zone about access and safety, but there really wasn't major discussion, unless Craig's going to come in and prove me wrong about these
gonna help you.
uses. You're going to help me. That's fantastic. So with respect to that, you know, we have to look at the project, look at the commensurate uses around it, and then try to provide testimony as to the relationship as to whether the negative and positive criteria can be achieved here and satisfy the board. I'll segue to Craig if he wants to add to that before I go into that.
Okay, so I prepared the reexamination on behalf of the planning board. During that reexamination, we recognized that essentially all of the properties along the S1 zone were non-conforming with regards to restaurants and retail. Mr. Cornick indicated earlier in his presentation that the only permitted uses, and that's indicated in my review, on page 5 of 7 at the bottom, retail and restaurant uses are not permitted in the S1. Recreational uses and amusement centers are the only permitted uses in the entire S1 district, which is essentially the beach strand along the promenade. The planning board recognized that and made a recommendation. It's in the land use recommendations that recommends that the ordinance be amended to incorporate those uses because they are important to the fabric of the community and tourism. So there's a recommendation in there. Now, that recommendation has not been implemented, so the current standards are as they are, and they do need a use variance. However, I think you can lean towards the master plan re-exam as the uses that are proposed being consistent with that re-examination. Now, they have other hurdles, like there's, the negative impacts, they have to address that, and that's kind of what the site plan is for, so you should be considering that. But I think the master plan re-examination speaks to the proposed uses are acceptable in that zone,
Just, can I ask a question? Just as with respect to that, and I was just curious as to whether the report also addressed parking along the promenade and the beach strand.
They did not address the park.
I must have overlooked that side of the reexamination because I look at the objectives and I see the recommendation. But it did help. So,
I know where you're-
Since we're still governed by the ordinance that exists, so I would ask Mr. Cornick to at least to elaborate on special reasons that would justify
Absolutely.
the variance relief.
So just to segue on what Craig had mentioned, again, we did look at the reexamination, and I did note that there was a specific discussion of the S1 and then the annex side of the convention ownership. But as we all know, and as indicated by Mr. Tiberzio, it is predominantly restaurant and retail along the promenade. So the use itself is a commensurate use to what we are expecting to see up there. So with regards to the positive criteria, I have to go and balance the site and figure out if it really fits. And as a planner, I can certainly state that it fits within the uses along the promenade. The site is particularly suited for that use. It's currently an underutilized building, as Mr. Tiberzio indicated, and we all know that. It's been vacant and not operational for a few years. The site is adequately sized to accommodate what the proposal is with regards to retail, with regards to the restaurant use. But we do have some bulk standard issues that we have to address, and I'll push forward to that into the site plan discussion here shortly. So, we're tasked then to really look at the municipal land use law and the purposes of zoning. And what I did is I went through the purposes and identified two. and I believe there's more, but two of the purposes that are really appropriate to this application. And purpose A is to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or the development of all lands in the state in a manner which will promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. So again, providing the retail and restaurant use, it's consistent with the area. Obviously, we don't want to come in with a use that's not consistent, and there's probably many that would not fit in the area, but these uses are. And it's detailed the exterior and interior renovations that Mr. Tiberzio is bringing to that location, I think will be an asset to community. And again, going towards the master plan reexamination, I guess recommendation, not necessarily objective, is to bring people back up to the promenade as indicated. Also, it promotes the preservation of the building and the consistent uses along the promenade in the S1 zone. So I believe purpose A is appropriate. Purpose G, to provide sufficient space and appropriate location for a variety of uses, both public and private, to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens. Again, it's an ideal location in the area currently used for retail and restaurant use. Again, an asset to the area, bring more people up to the promenade and to the businesses. And there's limited impact to the surrounding properties. As indicated, it's a renovation of the exterior, also interior, so we're not changing the building footprint. Setbacks, coverage, and design standards are not being altered. So I think what's being provided here is in line with Purpose G. So, you know, we go through the positive criteria, and then we have to balance that against the negative criteria. I think that there are no negative impact as a result of what's being proposed. I think the application will advance the purposes of zoning by encouraging the appropriate use and development of the lands and promote redevelopment, as we would say in this area. It will provide sufficient space in the location, maintaining the character of the promenade, which is the goal, not only with what we're proposing here, but what, as Craig had indicated in one of the recommendations. And then it's, again, removing an underutilized property that, in my eyes today, has essentially been rendered abandoned. And then I think we can all agree upon that. So I feel that your master plan now, in addition to what I read about the annex side, encourages this type of development. And I feel that the impact of this renovation and the use that we're proposing is appropriate and has no impact to the zone plan or the zoning ordinance of the city.
Yes. So in your opinion, the criteria for the grant of a use variance in this instance has been satisfied?
In my professional opinion, yes.
Can you address the parking? First go through a parking analysis as to what the needs are, and then the standards required for the variance.
Sure. So, again, we've got a uniquely shaped lot. While it is a square or a rectangle, it's a uniquely located lot in the district. We do not have direct access or frontage to a street other than the promenade, and then we have Beach Avenue. And as we all know, there is front or nose parking along the seawall, but we do not have opportunity or area to park other than the public parking that's available within the community. In addition to that, there are some comments that we'll hear from Mr. Hurlis's review, but we don't have bike or the ability to put bike racks on the property. The walls of the structure are on the property line, so we're out of space. And I think everybody can recognize that. And we can't go to the south or where the deck is of McGlade's because that is now beach. So at that point, we're restricted from doing any additional improvements to the south. With respect to load-unload, if you're familiar with the area, there is a specific restricted load-unload area along the promenade, and I believe Mr. Monzo has shown in Exhibit A1. If you look kind of to the left of the light, of the red light, you'll see a gore striped area, and that's specifically slated for load-unload access, not only for this particular property, but for all the area along the promenade, including the convention center. And flanking that is you have bike racks for everybody. I use them when we're in town, and they're there, and it's appropriate. Throughout the summer, I have not experienced a challenge of finding a bike location there, so I think there's sufficient bike parking. But we are deficient in parking as it relates to the uses proposed, including McGlades. So your ordinance requires a minimum of 67 spaces. And we just don't have that opportunity, so I consider that a true hardship. So I think that we hit the C1 criteria as it relates to the variance relief that we're seeking in that aspect.
Mr. Cornick, very quickly, in addition, you talked about bike racks. I believe there have been a number of bike racks added since this picture has been taken.
Yeah.
So there's even more than shown here. Okay.
They have.
And I'm not sure, I mean, I know, unless it's changed, I don't think bicycles are permitted on the promenade.
They are during certain hours.
Right, but during, mainly during the afternoon,
Usually, yeah, in the morning up until about 10 o'clock
10 o'clock. Okay.
in the summertime.
I'm just not sure bike racks on the promenade itself would be appropriate based on that, so.
And I think the city's been cracking down on bikes being locked on benches and staying on bike racks too long. So it's, you're seeing more and more bikes, which I think is a good thing in the city. But I think that this location has sufficient parking and bike parking for the uses.
Can you just touch briefly on the negative criteria with respect to parking and then just the balancing?
Sure, so, you know.
Actually, it's not a balancing, if you could just touch
It's not a
on that.
balancing, because I consider it a hardship. So, but you can look at the negative criteria and whether there truly is a negative impact as it relates to the parking aspect here. And I don't find anything negative, just because it's been a consistent use in the community. And again, when you have patrons of the promenade, a good portion of that is the demographic that is renting in the community and are already here. So they're walking and biking up to the area. So I do not find any negative impact as it relates to the parking aspect of the application.
Are you looking at this to be seasonal, like most
Yes.
is up there?
Yes.
The construction that's going on in front, this probably it's going to affect your application a little bit, but it has really nothing to do with you. Does anybody know what they're doing in front of Convention Hall right now? Are they removing parking spaces or adding parking spaces? They've ripped all that concrete out.
No,
There's
they're-
more bike racks there,
Yeah, they just filled it in.
but they're not changing any, they're not taking
No.
the parking spaces away. Okay.
No. They took away the plan area and bike racks.
Will the parking for this be really any different than for permitted use or amusement?
No.
That's sort of the point, is that
You know, the lion's share of the parking demand on the facility is the existing non-conforming use, which is the McGlades Restaurant, which is a much larger facility. So I had contacted the owner of McGlades. They maintain approximately 120 seats in that facility throughout the outside and inside. So that particular use requires, per your ordinance, 30 spaces. On top of that, we have to provide one space per employee. These particular uses, with respect to the retail, we are required to have 8.5 spaces, so we round that up to 9. And then the restaurant uses with 24 seats each requires 12 spaces. So, you know, we're less than what's existing or the demand that's there now. If we were to take the area of the restaurants, we would probably be about 2 spaces higher or 2 spaces lower each for the restaurant uses. So I think, you know, the demand is pretty similar to what would be allowed there if it were retail.
If you can now touch on the signs and the criteria for relief for having 4 signs for a total of 80 square feet as opposed to 1 sign at a total of 20 square feet.
Sure, so synonymous to what you see on the promenade now, we have multiple buildings. Some of them are more narrow and wider. You know, Fudge Kitchen's much more narrow than the clothing retail. These are all separate units, and each one of them has separate signs. And I believe that as what we are proposing with 4 condominium units, 4 signs, I believe that's an appropriate wayfinding package with respect to signage on these buildings. In prior applications, yeah, we can pull this back down, but in prior use, the Morrow's Nut House had a series of panels, which they were merely just plywood sheets with certain aspects of their retail uses inside, as well as McGlades. So I believe that the signs are appropriate to the scale of the building. They're synonymous to what Mr. Tiberzio did to the, I guess you called it west, to where the new arcade and
Yes.
restaurant are.
Same
They're
thing.
very similar, and I feel that they're in character with the promenade and what's proposed as the renovation of the promenade starts to migrate, I guess, to the west as well, or to the east.
Do you see any negative impacts by having the signage that's being proposed?
I don't see any negative impacts. I think the aspect of the sign fits well within the architecture. It's very calm. It's not a difficult sign to see, and I think it's consistent with what you want along
Not
the promenade.
illuminated inside, or
Back illumination.
back, yeah.
Right.
No, they're front lit.
Front lit.
Are there front?
Front
Mr.
lit.
Tiberzio, I just wanted to point out that these are front lit, these aren't backlit signs.
So the gooseneck lights over top of them? is what
Yes,
you're looking
like a gooseneck light, like a spotlight, small one.
Right. So it wouldn't have any impact on Beach Avenue. It certainly wouldn't have any impact on the adjacent uses and the uses to the north, on the opposite side of Beach Avenue as well.
So with these, as you balance the positive criteria against the negative impacts, does it justify a C2 variance for the signage?
It justifies the C2. Again, I think it promotes the general goals of the city and along the promenade as well. I don't see a negative impact with respect to the signage and the zone plan, and I think it's consistent with what you see along the promenade and have seen consistently along the promenade historically.
And lastly, there's a variance being requested for not having the loading zone. I know we touched on that briefly, but can you elaborate a little more on that?
Sure. So obviously, we do not have direct access to Beach Avenue, to any of the buildings along the promenade, so we have a restriction, and it's a hardship. There's not an ability to bring a truck up onto the promenade safely to do deliveries, but we do have a safe spot and a dedicated spot for the entire area. And I don't recall, in my experience, seeing that spot has been overwhelmed. Predominantly, anybody coming in with supplies in a restaurant use would be supplying the entire promenade at once. So I think the load-unload area is appropriate, and again, it's a hardship, so I don't see how we can get anything else better than what we have there. In the past, prior to the work with Convention Hall, they never had a load-unload area there. It was drive up real quick, unload it on the boardwalk, and then get that truck out of there to get the next guy in. So I think it's an appropriate variance.
I have no further questions from Mr. Cornick. We can.
Do any of the board members have any questions?
I have a question.
Mary?
You may mention, I thought I understood you earlier to say that one restaurant, the far left, was going to be a seating area for the Asian restaurant? So there's not going to be a kitchen there?
No, there'll be a kitchen inside.
Okay, but that's going to be for the Asian restaurant that's already on the promenade?
No, it's not there yet.
Oh, it's not there yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's empty right now.
Right, okay, I've seen it. I didn't know if one of the other stores there.
No. It's
Okay.
a new person.
Okay. Also, I thought Mr. Monzo said something about there would be no changes on the outside of the building, and yet that's a metal roof that's not there. I'm looking at it now, and that's different than what's on the building.
No expansion of the building. So we're
Pardon?
doing a renovation of the exterior
Right.
materials, but no expansion of the building.
Okay.
I just wondered, what is your season?
Well, the arcade is obviously open, Easter through September, and then weekends after that. And we usually close down Thanksgiving because it's pretty tough to have the water run on the beachfront with the threat of pipes freezing. So it's pretty much, Thanksgiving is like the last weekend usually. And I would think that these storekeepers too,
Yeah.
they're not going to want to go further than that. So
This
That's-
isn't being set up as like fine dining, it's just kind of casual.
just casual,
walk
yes,
in.
yes.
What type of seating would be inside, do you know? Or
Some tables and chairs, like square tables and chairs.
not booths or?
No.
or
No.
Counters or anything?
A coffee shop has a counter on the wall that, they would put stools there maybe.
And the baked goods, they come, I'm assuming they're sent to you, or do you make them?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not
Just-
sure.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
You said, I might be wrong, did you say there's an existing non-conforming restaurant on site now?
There is. So again, this property historically has been one building.
that's what I
But
thought.
back in the 90s, I believe the Morrows cut it up into condominium units in McGlade's Restaurant, McGlade's on the beach.
That's
That's the existing.
but that's not the application. That has nothing to do with this
Yeah,
application.
It's not, it's part of the property, but it's not part of this application. There's nothing being changed there.
You mentioned that that wasn't part of the site plan, but it's on the site. So like when we consider the parking calculations, it's the entire site. So there's no changes proposed to that.
Correct.
I think is the accurate statement, but it is part of the site plan that you're going to approve.
Correct.
The 67 parking spaces included Glades, not only the seating, but also included employees for all
Right.
of the stores in this building.
Correct.
And you mentioned something about a D2 variant. This is a D1 variance, right? Or you think it's a D2? I thought it was D1 because.
I think we applied for D1. I think what Mr. Cornick is saying, because there's a restaurant in the building.
If you're
that-
expanding the existing one, I would say D2, but you have two new ones. So it's it's D1, I believe.
I would agree that it would,
Yeah.
probably D1
Can't
is
go
more
wrong with
appropriate.
D1.
Right.
The D2 is a lesser standard, so if that's
Right.
wrong, then we get in trouble, but the D1 is a upper standard, so.
So I restate D1 then. We're back to that.
Okay, any other questions by the board members? Okay, well, thank you. Mr. Hurlis?
Good evening, everyone. My latest review memorandum for this application is dated March 3, 2022. This is a project located in the S1 Beach Strand District. The zoning regulations in this district are very quirky, and they're set up really just for the one permitted use, which is the amusement centers. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that. So you've heard testimony from the applicant indicating they're proposing to construct 4 units within the structure. Restaurant 1 indicates 24 seats, Restaurant 2 indicates another 24 seats, Retail Space 1 is 839 square feet of selling area, and Retail Space number 2 indicates 870 square feet of selling area. And the existing restaurant, which has been referred to as McGlade's, at the rear of the structure is being retained and not being changed or altered. The applicant has requested a site plan and waiver of requirements. So with regards to that, there are some completeness review items that, waivers that they've requested, in addition to the waiver from the requirements of site plan, and I'll go through those, or start on page 2 of 7. For the checklist items from C&D variances, items 19, 21, 26, 27, 28, 32, and 33. They've requested waivers from those, and based on the improvements that are already on the site, the fact that the site's pretty much built out and there's no open space around those, the conditions warrant those waivers, so I think I could support those, and I think the board should consider that. With regards to the applicant has requested a waiver from site plan in accordance with section 417.3. Its site plan is required, and that's indicated under B4 at the bottom of page 3, because there is a change in use, because there's a change in building arrangements, and there are other considerations of site plan review. So the next section on page 4 of 7 is the waiver of site plan review requirements. And I believe that this section is applicable, and I did support the waiver of a lot of the site plan review requirements. However, I did ask them to prepare a limited site plan that addresses some of the potential negative impacts of the use. And those negative impacts could be adverse lighting or inadequate lighting. So we wanted to see the lighting. And so there's comments in my report that ask for a little bit more lighting information. We also asked for them to identify how the trash and recycling would be handled. Whenever we get restaurant-type uses, those types of uses typically have trash issues. There could be odor issues, so we want to make sure that they can adequately address the trash and recycling. And then we already talked about the loading. Obviously, this loading area can't be provided on site, but we wanted to make sure that they had access and that site could be loaded because restaurant and retail uses bring product to the site. So those were some of the negative impacts. And I think the applicant's limited site plan that they provided addresses that. But there's no need, for instance, to provide a grading and drainage plan because, one, the water table is so high there, there's no drainage that can be provided, and there's none that's required. So for those reasons, I did support the waiver of site plan review requirements from all of the other items that are required.
So I'm putting, those three are going to be conditions of approval?
Well, I'll go through the rest of my report. They've satisfied most of those issues, but I do have some holdover comments that they need to give me some conditional information to after, if the board is going to be willing to grant approval. All right, so item number, at the bottom under the requirements for site plans, item 3O, which is the location of the required utilities. And in this case, we want to ensure that the restaurant is not going to cause blockages in the existing sanitary sewer system, so we want to see that they're going to provide an adequate grease trap so that there's no blockages of the sewer. So that information should be provided as a condition of any approval. And then also, item AA is providing the site plan in digital format as a condition of approval. So based on those recommendations, I did support deeming the application complete. Moving on to the zoning requirement review that's on page 4 and 5 of the report. You've heard testimony from the applicant indicating that they are seeking the D1 use variance for the commercial retail and two restaurants, two retail stores. That's a non-conforming condition that the board has to address with the review of the variances. You heard testimony with regards to the signage area. Once again, they're allowed to have multiple signs, but those signs have to be less than 20 square foot. So in this case, they've asked for 4 signs at 20 square foot. So the board should consider that variance. The parking, 67 spaces are required. Obviously, there is no room to park on site. There's no existing parking. There's none proposed. And finally, the way the ordinance is written with regards to the loading space, it says the necessity for a loading zone shall be determined by the planning board or zoning board of adjustment in connection with site plan review. In this case, it doesn't say that there has to be one provided on site. They've provided a location of one that might satisfy the board. I don't know that there's even a variance necessary from that section. Okay, I'll move on. That's a review of the variances, and I discussed a little bit about the potential negative impacts. The board should just make sure that they're satisfied that the applicant has addressed those: loading, trash recycling, lighting, etc. So, moving on to my general review comments, these should all be conditions of approval. One is our standard condition that just to make sure that whatever improvements they're doing doesn't necessarily concentrate stormwater runoff that impacts an adjoining owner, so that a grading and drainage plan would be required if they were to do that. Item number 2, so the note on the plan indicates that the existing soffit lighting is to be replaced and no new lighting is proposed. I'm not aware that any previous site plan review was ever done for the lighting, so I asked them to provide the lighting information shown on a plan and make so that I can verify that it's adequate.
We will comply with that. We'll provide lighting.
With regards for item number 3 is requests for information with regards to the sign material and the lighting design details. You heard testimony, but that's not on any plan, so we want to just make sure that that's provided on the plan. Interesting fact is that all the properties on that side of the promenade are not in the sign material and lighting design does comply with the ordinance, and there are ordinance requirements with regards to that.
We will provide that in a revised plan.
Okay. Item number 4, and this is a comment that is contained in the S1 strand requirements, and that's specific language taken from that. So I tried to stay within spirit of that and to see if there was any available space for bicycle racks. And I think that the ordinance is kind of saying we realize that there's no on-site parking for any of these properties in the S1 district. So if you can give us some bicycle racks, that would be appreciated. I think you've heard testimony indicating there's no room for it. The walls are at the site property lines, so I don't take exception with them not providing that. Item 5 is the requirement to provide the required inspection, escrow, and the certificate of occupancy is not to be issued until they satisfactorily address the correctness and accuracy of all site improvements. Item 6 is comply with the requirements of the Shade Tree Commission, Fire Department, Police Department, Environmental Commission, unless otherwise modified by the board's approval. The only report that I saw was the Shade Tree Commission said there's no trees involved, and they did recommend approval. 7 is the requirement to provide the grease trap information. 8 is condition any approval on compliance with all other state, county, and local approvals. Item 9 is just indicating that Beach Avenue is a county right-of-way, that Cape May County Planning Department is required. Have you?
I talked to the planning department. They said as long as there's no drainage impact, they'll waive the requirement.
Okay.
But I told them we'd submit a copy of the plan and they'll
Okay.
sign off on that.
So we'll just get whatever
Yes.
they're going to require. We just like evidence of that. 10 is just informational, indicating it's not in the historic district. 11 is the applicant is required to comply with any and all applicable affordable housing requirements at the time of approval or issuance of building permits. And finally, item number 12, should the board grant approval, the applicant is going to be required to revise the plans and provide those plans to the board engineer for review for compliance. So that's a summary of my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay,
the board
thank you,
has.
Mr. Hurley. Any questions by members of the board?
I just wanted to say that the 4 units under this description is 2 retail spaces and 2 restaurants, but you're indicating it's actually 3 restaurants, because the ice cream store you said wanted to have seating also.
No, the ice cream is just a walk-up.
It is just walk?
Yes.
Okay.
It's Coors Ice Cream on the
Oh,
mall.
Okay.
Which they have like 10 other locations.
I thought you said they wanted a place for
No,
people to sit.
no, they
That was
don't.
the coffee shop,
That's
The coffee shop,
was-
yeah.
Okay.
the seating, yes.
I have a
it's-
question about the lighting. You said the lights, we're going to just put lights on the signs indirectly from the front, and then the soffit, the overhang will have recessed lighting underneath it. And I wanted to put one light in between this overhang and that overhang on like a wall sconce, just to light this area at night to keep it safer. So that's basically the lighting.
And we want to see that shown on a plan so that it can, we can review it and make sure that you're providing adequate lighting, so.
Can you just briefly address the sign material? I think it's
The
important.
sign material is, it's wood, it's like 3/4 inch, and it's just painted, so, in keeping with Cape May.
Right, the sewer lines that run up there. This is now going to have 4 bathrooms where there's probably just 1 before. Will anything additional have to be done to the sewer to handle this? I'm concerned about cutting the seawall to get another line down there.
I'm not aware of any, but they haven't shown us any information with regards to that, so that's why we want to see the design. So if it requires alterations or something like that, ultimately, that stuff would have to be approved by the sewer and water department. But, so I can't, none of that information's on the plan, I can't even venture a guess what's going on there.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, then at this time, I'll open this to the meeting to members of the public. Anybody within 200 feet? Okay, seeing none. Anybody beyond 200 feet that want to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public portion of the meeting. Okay, at this time, I will turn it over to our board attorney.
Is there any discussion among the board members?
One question, there's no fire department certificate, which we've had for every application.
I'm sorry, I didn't,
No response from
Fire.
the Fire department?
No response from the
No
fire department.
department certificate.
okay, anybody, any further discussion?
I have a question. What is a grease trap?
So a grease trap is a device that separates cooking grease from the discharge into the sewer system. So what it's trying to do is remove the ability for that to clog up downstream drains.
Basically filters it out?
Yeah, it's a box, it looks like an ice chest. And it filters and you clean it out and dispose of it elsewhere.
Right, okay.
With
Thank
regard
you.
to the fire department question, it is helpful to have that beforehand, but I will note that comment number 6, which will be in the resolution condition, they have to comply with the requirements of the Cape May Shade Tree Commission, the fire department, and police department. So if something arises during their project, the fire official or fire department will deal with it. So I don't know that there's any site plan issues. Usually for us, and Craig will correct me if I'm wrong, usually the fire department stuff is important to us where there's a side yard variance or like a pool close to a house where the concern is their ability to get to all the different areas they'd have to get to fight a fire, or turning radius to get a cul-de-sac, that kind of stuff. Fire code issues are more construction type issues that we don't deal with. So our fire considerations are usually things that impact site plan and distances between structures and buildings. So it's a good question. It'd be better to know it than not know it. But I can tell you on this type of application, it's not as critical. And there's a restaurant 50 feet further than this one is from the promenade, and so, you know, that one is probably harder to get to, I would think.
But I think, Rich, that McGlades has egress capability where some of these restaurants are landlocked.
Okay, I'm sorry, but you're talking about people escaping the building?
Right.
Right, but that would fall within the fire code in terms of exits and signage interior and stuff like that. They'll have to comply with all that. That's what that condition is about, okay?
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. King, you want to take over?
Okay, the applicant, in a very thorough presentation, has gone through each of the standards for each of the variances they need and have given you, in my opinion, adequate basis for the variances they seek. It doesn't mean you have to grant it, it just means that they've addressed each of the standards and have given evidence in support of each one of those. It's up to you how you weigh those. There's a lot of variance, even though it sounds simple, there's actually 3 different types of variances going on here. There's a use variance, which is typically a difficult variance to get because it's a use that's not permitted in the zone. But this is kind of a unique zone in that nearly every use in the zone is not the use that is in the zoning ordinance. This gentleman happens to own the only 2 legitimate permitted uses on the boardwalk. The rest are restaurants and other retail that aren't permitted but have historically seemed to be okay in the zone. But it is a use variance, so you heard the standards, the D1 variance. They provided that the site is uniquely suited for it and that they've given purposes of zoning, which are special reasons in that context. So that's the D1 standard, and you should apply that to the use variance. They also have a parking variance, which they phrased as a hardship variance, meaning the kind where the topography or the structures existing on the site create a hardship that make it difficult to comply with the zoning requirement, in this case parking. None of the uses on the boardwalk have parking, so if you're going to require a lot of parking to have a use on the boardwalk, you're not going to have many uses on the boardwalk. So that is not an outrageous request. And also, as I pointed out, I tried to highlight for the applicant, I personally think it's important that the permitted uses, there's no evidence in the record that the permitted uses would generate much less parking than the use they're trying to get. And I really think that's the analysis, not the parking that's absent, but rather the parking that's exacerbated by what they're trying to do. And there really isn't much evidence that the restaurant and retail is going to drain a lot more parking than, say, if this whole thing became an amusement park. So that's something for you to consider. And the other variance is a signage variance, which ours seems to be based on buildings and not units. But since there's 4 units, so they want 4 signs, but Craig is correct, that the way ours is written, it sounds like you get 1 sign per building, I think is what it says, right?
It says, no, it says you can have multiple signs,
With 20 feet,
but,
the total.
correct.
Yeah, so, you have to weigh if those signs seem to be in proportion and make sense under the reasons that the engineer gave you for that variance. The benefits of better wayfinding outweigh trying to have, they would have signs that are, 1 foot by 3 foot, and they'd have 4 of those up in the air on the boardwalk. And they are across the promenade, so from the street, it's kind of hard to see those, so maybe that's another reason to consider if these signs are appropriate for that location, okay? But those are the considerations. So the motion I'd recommend being made is a motion to consider the application as a whole, unless someone feels a reason there's something they're concerned about, and I'll pull that out separate. But in general, we typically vote on these things as a whole. It's a use variance, so it needs, I'm speaking, it needs 5 out of 7. It's a use variance, so you need 5 out of 7. So as you vote, please understand that, so we have 7. So if 3 of you say no, it'll be rejected. So the motion to be made is a motion to grant a use variance, signage variance, parking variance, and loading variance in conformance with page 5 of the engineer's report, subject to the 3 waivers that were discussed and the conditions as outlined by your board engineer. Okay? Does everyone understand that?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. King. All right, at this point in time, I will entertain a motion.
Make the motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Notch, seconded by Ms. Hessel. Mrs. Werner?
I'm voting yes. I think it's a very nice design, looks attractive. I think that whole area has really been going downhill, and I think it's an improvement. I don't have a problem with the signage. I think it's appropriate to have each store have its own sign. So I vote yes.
Ms. Hessel?
I'm voting yes, and I hope to stop by sometime.
Thank you.
Mr. Ledwin?
Yes.
Mrs. Notch?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Venuto?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yeah, I'm voting yes. I think it's an inherent beneficial use for our promenade up there. I think it's going to be a nice addition. I'm voting
Very
yes.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good luck, Villanova.
Okay, thank you. Go Nova. At this point, I'll entertain any discussion or anything by any members of the board. Okay, seeing none, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Okay, go Nova.
Go Nova, yeah.
The Glades is existing.
Just not a good time for this